Today, the world's weirdest church, decorated with the bones of 40,000 dead. A gruesome collection of skinned bodies in a secret museum. A restless theater ghost, still attending performances. The first alien abductee ever. The 130-year-old corpse of a saint, perfectly preserved. It's wild, it's weird, it's real strange. Here, in the heart of the Czech Republic, in the town of Sedlic, is All Saints Church. Behind these walls lies one of the most bizarre sights in all the world, for All Saints is all bones. A church filled with the gruesome remains of over 40,000 unburied dead. Here can be seen evidence of the plague epidemic and of countless wars, all those bodies together in a church to die for. Why so many bones in a house of worship, and why are they arranged in such bizarre ways? In this dusty crypt, snakes squirm through empty eye sockets. A bird gouges out the eye of a helpless victim, and candles rest on skulls, illuminating an altar made of human remains, while spiders spin their webs without fear of offending their hosts. Is this evidence of some unspeakable horror, the lair of a twisted cult given to human sacrifice, or is it perhaps the setting for a black mass? The answer can be found in a graveyard. This morbid story begins in the 13th century. A monk returned from the Holy Land with dirt collected from the site of the crucifixion of Jesus. He sprinkled the dirt around the graveyard. Suddenly, everybody wanted in. Nobles and notables clamored for a grave in the holy ground. The dead and mostly dead were brought to All Saints Church. Business was booming, helped along by plague and epidemics. Soon, the monks were up to their cowls in dead bodies. With the graveyard full, the monks turned the church into a charnel house. Over decades, the corpses decayed and the bones were piled haphazardly in the ossuary. Time polished the bodies into stacks of bones, which were easier for the monks to handle. So easy, in fact, that a half-blind monk was charged with cleaning up the grisly gristle. The best he could manage was a pyramid made of human bones. By the 19th century, the death toll climbed to 40,000 complete skeletons. The dead had overrun the living. And so the ruling Schwarzenberg family hired a woodcarver named Frederick Rindt to do something about the ghastly bones. Given the simple instruction to make something that was pleasing to behold, Rindt surveyed the house of worship turned mortuary and set the bones in place. Inspired by his surroundings, or perhaps a little bit crazy, Rindt created something unique on a challenging project that gives new definition to the term bare bones. There are bones everywhere, in every combination and variation. Hip bones supporting skulls, ribs and femurs fanning out across the ceiling, and below, even bony bells and crosses. This macabre masterpiece displaying the religious as well as the humorous. The centerpiece is the 8-foot-tall, 9-foot-wide chandelier, a vast, dizzying, one-of-a-kind piece, boasting at least one of every bone in the human body. Finally, Rindt created this coat of arms, an homage to the Schwarzenbergs. This crest is made completely out of bones. The crown depicts the princely origins of the Schwarzenbergs. Each quadrant of the crest depicts another dominion over which the family reigned. Most notably, the conquest of the Turkish fortress Rob in 1599. The raven is plucking out the eye of the hated Turk, celebrating the family's great military victory. The Schwarzenbergs were not too subtle. And so that there would be no doubt later, Rindt even autographed his work, in bones, of course. Today, All Saints Church is still used for religious services. Many who attend these services are anxious to uncover where we go after death. But in the Church of Bones, it's easier to see what remains. It's strange, real strange. The Eiffel Tower has a secret. At the top is a love nest created by its builder Gustave Eiffel so he could meet his many lovers there. Paris has another secret, a small museum containing one of the world's most macabre collections. Here in Alfort in the 1760s, Honoré Fragonard dissected cadavers to teach his students the internal workings of both humans and animals. He created bizarre sculptures like this bust of a man, skin peeled away from the skull, mounted on a pedestal. Fragonard followed a technique used by other anatomists, preserving body parts by soaking them in alcohol mixed with pepper and herbs. While they were still supple, Fragonard injected the veins, bronchial tubes, and arteries with colored wax mixed with turpentine. The muscles were separated, then the bodies were stretched on a frame and left to dry. The work was incredibly delicate and time-consuming. Every blood vessel required wax injections, and every surface, muscle, and nerve was individually coated in wax. His strange obsession with skinned cadavers contributed to his dismissal in 1771 on the grounds of insanity. Fortunately, some of his work is still on display. This stunning figure is a skinned man holding the jawbone of an ass. And here is the star of the grisly collection, the man on horseback. This horse, caught in mid-stride, looks as if it's been flayed alive. Every cord of its flexed muscles is visible. Bulging blue veins stretch over its jaws. Tendons and ligaments strain to raise the outthrust neck. The upright rider, arms bent as if to grip reins and a whip, is not exactly a skeleton, but neither is it human. The shining orbs of his eyes stare fixedly into the distance, over rows of gritted teeth. Glass eyes were common in wax figures like these, which were being made about the same time in Italy. The models were used to teach anatomy to medical students who couldn't get access to the real luxury of a real corpse. Fragonards are more powerful, as they are set into the eye sockets of a real skull and make the monstrous face even more terrifying. For many, this tableau alone would be horrific enough, but Fragonard decided to add yet another touch. The skinned horse and rider are surrounded by tiny human babies serving as foot soldiers. Fragonard produced over 3,000 of these grotesque creations. Although the secrets of his preservation methods died with him, his bizarre obsession with death lives on. This is Easton, Pennsylvania. Here on July 8, 1776, one of only 3 public readings in the colonies of the Declaration of Independence took place. Easton is a hot spot for hauntings. Visitors doing a little ghost hunting are unlikely to go home disappointed. The local State Theater Center for the Arts boasts its very own Phantom of the Opera, affectionately known as Fred. J. Fred Osterstock was area manager for the United Artists Theater chain and worked out of the State Theater from 1926 until his death in 1957. But he was far too stage-struck to remain in his grave. Fred has been known to wander the boiler room, the stage. He even leaves telltale signs of his cigar smoking.
The first time I came in contact with Fred, I was manager of the theater, and my office was his office. And at night, every theater has a ghost light that they keep on. I turned the light on, and I saw a gentleman in a gray suit walking off the stage. So I immediately went and turned some more lights on and went onto the stage to see if I could find this person who was there. I found no one. I checked the entire stage and checked the theater, and there wasn't anyone there, so I wrote it off as being a figment of my imagination. A few days later, I was talking to, I believe it was Charlie Seifert. He was the projectionist at the time, and described the person to him. And he, a few days later, brought in a picture and said, "Is this the gentleman you saw walking off stage?" I said, "Yeah, who is it?" He said, "It's Fred Osterstock." That was my first encounter with him.
The day I saw Fred was really just an ordinary day. We had had a photo shoot, and I saw a man sitting in the box, and then I thought, wait a minute, there's nobody here. I didn't authorize anybody's being here, and I took a step back, and there was nobody in here. So I came in, and I walked down, and I said, hello, hello, excuse me, and I ran up the little steps that lead to that box, and there was nobody there. And I thought, you know, this is ridiculous. And I went into the office and I said, who let someone in the building? No one's supposed to be in here. And I said, he looks so familiar. And then it was, oh, he looks so familiar because it was Fred.
Prior to my becoming a member of the staff, I was toured by a young man through the theater. And as we got to the mezzanine, I thought I smelled smoke. He said, that's the theater ghost. Well, I filed that behind me. I didn't put any credence to it. So we continued our tour, and as we got to the star's dressing room, in the middle of the freshly vacuumed rug was a shiny copper penny. And the young man said to me, well, I guess that is Fred welcoming you aboard. Unfortunately, I lost the penny, which didn't mean anything to me anyway. Within those 2 weeks, I went down into the basement, and in the middle of that concrete floor, to my surprise, was the shiny copper penny. So I was told he was just giving me another chance. So I picked it up, and there began my journey with Fred and my shiny copper pennies, which he continues to give me to this day.
Fred has left Lois more than 70 pennies. He was so dedicated to his beloved theater, even death couldn't stop him from keeping an eye on the place.
We've had experiences with bats, and they tend to be on days that we've had a little trouble with some temperament. We had one occasion where the bat came in, we don't know how it got in, and flew around the performer, quite literally around the performer above her as she performed her show, to the point that the audience was just carrying on so much that the artist broke character and stopped and said, I'm not that funny, you know, what are you laughing at? Or, you know, reacting to. And she looked up and she started laughing too, and she finally left the stage and, you know, kind of pulled herself together, came back on and completed her show. But then we don't find the bats anymore. They just fly right out as though they were, you know, they're here really to be fulfilling some sort of mission, which we think they are.
Shelley asked us not to show Fred's face. Here he is with Leo, the MGM lion.
We don't show Fred. We don't use pictures of Fred because we don't want people to know what Fred looked like, because when they come up and tell us that they encountered someone in the hall, or they met someone in the basement, or they saw somebody in the balcony, we like to hear them describe him. And that's our little way of knowing whether they really saw Fred.
At this point, an extraordinary thing happened. Fred paid us a visit while we were filming. If he couldn't be seen, he was determined to make himself heard.
I keep hearing noises coming from the far side of the stage, and I asked a few of the guys here, I'm like, who's over there? Who's making those noises? And they're like, we're all over here. There's no one else in here. I hear pingings, I hear stuff rolling, doors closing. Fred must just want to let us know he's here.
Well, every time I came into the State Theater, I always went, hi, Uncle Fred, Ray Jr.'s here.
When Fred's nephew started talking to us, we had a pipe over here start making some noises. We thought it was a heat pipe, but the heat's turned off and it's still making noises. And I don't know, there's a slight chill over the air once he started talking.
That has to be Uncle Fred. I think he knows when I'm here. I hope so, anyhow.
Fred is such an important part of the theater scene, he even has an award named after him. The Freddie Awards are given to local high schools in recognition of exceptional accomplishments in the production and performance of musical theater.
And the spirit of the award is our spirit. It's Fred the Ghost.
For youngsters who feel they don't have a ghost of a chance of making it big on Broadway, how better to encourage them than by giving them a Freddie, an award named after their very own ghost. It's strange. Cities the world over have their landmarks. London's Big Ben, New York's Statue of Liberty, the Hollywood sign in Los Angeles. So what makes their hometown special is different for everyone. For the people living in Paducah, Kentucky, their particular icon is stranger than most.
He's got a lot of publicity. People ask about him when he comes to town. I really don't even know how they find out about Speedy.
And we have people from all over the world, especially in the summertime, that come in asking about Speedy. They want to know if the story's true.
And the strangest thing about Speedy and the people of Paducah is no one seems to see anything strange about him. So who is Speedy, or perhaps more accurately, who was he? Charles Henry Atkins lived here in Paducah, occasionally working in a local tobacco plant or doing odd jobs around town. Sometimes, when a traveling circus arrived, he would do a few acrobatics to entertain folk. He took life at an easy pace, so the locals teasingly nicknamed him Speedy. Poor Charles Atkins drowned one day in 1928 while he was out fishing here on the banks of the Ohio River. He had no family and no close friends, so his body was turned over to A.Z. Hammock, the local undertaker, for a pauper's burial. But Mr. Hammock had been working on a new embalming fluid. If it was successful, he would revolutionize his business, knock out the competition, and would never have to buy expensive patented fluids again. It would be a waste to bury a good corpse without trying out his new invention first.
No one knows what he used in his embalming fluid, not even myself, because I was there when he, in fact, he made his own embalming fluid, but no one knew what he put in it.
So he set to work on Speedy. When he had finished, he was so delighted by the results, he decided that one good turn deserved another. He would delay the funeral for a while and use Speedy as a real-life, or should we say death, model. After all, Speedy had nowhere to go in a hurry, so burying him needn't be done too hastily. Meet Speedy, Mr. Hammock's pride and joy. In fact, he got so attached to Speedy, he just kept delaying the funeral. It was delayed and delayed.
Well, I think it was particularly unusual due to my experience in embalming. It was very phenomenal that a man could last 50-some years and never have to re-embalm him or do anything to him. I think it's phenomenal, and it's a great thing.
The embalming fluid sure mummified Speedy, making his skin like leather. Hammock didn't want to bury the body. He wanted to see how long his top-secret formula would preserve it. And since Speedy never minded sitting around doing nothing when he was alive, well then, surely it was okay for him to do so now that he was dead. Then the undertaker had a brainstorm. Instead of having this skeleton, mummy, in his closet, he might as well display him so the good citizens of Paducah could marvel at his work and bring him their dearly departed when the time came.
And so Speedy gained a home in a closet at Hammock Funeral Home. And he went through all the different clothing changes with the styles. He went through the Zoot suits of the 40s, and he even went through the 1970s Las Vegas Wayne Newton big bow tie spell, and that's what we have a picture of him in the museum at that time period.
Then came the Great Paducah Flood of 1937. The Ohio River once again claimed Speedy as its victim. The funeral home was flooded, and when the water subsided, he was found floating around the parlor. So, as he couldn't brush himself down and smarten himself up, help was enlisted for the job.
Then Mr. Hammock said to me, "Well, horse, you want to be an undertaker?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, your first body will be Speedy," and we laughed. I said, "Well, he's already embalmed." He said, "Well, you go out there, and that's your job, to take a water hose and clean him off." And I mean, I'd rather embalm 10 or 12 bodies than to done that, because his body was creased, and you had to wash him off good with hose and sponges and everything, and then that wouldn't get it. You had to take a toothbrush and get in those seams.
Hammock died in 1949, taking his secret formula to the grave, but leaving Speedy above ground. Now in the custody of AZ's widow Velma, Speedy's adventures continued. He appeared on television programs and at social functions throughout Paducah.
One time at the Chamber of Commerce annual dinner, they had little areas around the room with views of Paducah's past, little display areas. And Speedy was there in the corner. He had a curtain around him, and I peeked in, and he had a tuxedo on, and he was propped up in the corner. And he was a little worse for wear and tear, but he still looked a little elegant standing in the corner.
Carnivals and circuses tried to buy Speedy, but Mrs. Hammock, who now ran the home, refused to sell the man who had become family after so many years. After all, he was now a sentimental reminder of her dear departed and peacefully buried husband. Speedy continued to hang out in the funeral home as the other less permanent residents came and went. Finally, Mrs. Hammock decided enough was enough. Speedy, who by now had spent more years in Paducah as a corpse than he ever did as a living being, should finally be buried. The free funeral, pledged by her husband in 1928, took place in 1994.
So I'm not sure, Speedy, if he'd had the choice, he might not wanted to have been buried if he'd had the choice, because he was such a celebrity, and I don't know what kind of a life he had, but to be a celebrity like that, he might not want to have given it up.
The petrified pauper of Paducah had an elaborate funeral. Town elders spoke, and flowers adorned his gravesite, which, by the way, is in one of the prime areas of the cemetery. Here lies Charles Speedy Atkins, anonymous in life, celebrity in death, buried 66 years after his passing, finally resting in peace. Not what you would call a speedy burial. It's strange, real strange. This is the Bata Shoe Museum in Zlín in the Czech Republic. It contains pretty much what you would expect in a shoe museum, lots of shoes. Everything from Aborigine shoes to medieval boots to delicate royal French slippers. Shoes from China for bound feet, and shoes to prevent the skirt of the wearer from getting wet, the ultimate elevator shoe. And speaking of elevators, that's really why we're here. While the shoes are fascinating, this is the most astounding part of the museum. On first glance, it looks like an office, which it is. It has a desk, chairs, telephone, all the usual furniture you would expect of a 1930s office. It does have a lot of windows. Obviously, the man who designed it, Jan Bata, head of the Bata Shoe Factory, liked a lot of light. He wanted a room with a view. But Mr. Bata was no ordinary executive. He was a guy who was going places. Bata decided that as the life of an executive was full of ups and downs, he might as well stay in his office to experience them. So he made his office into an elevator. Or did he make his elevator into an office? Whichever way it was, he could keep his shoemakers on their toes just by pressing these buttons. The office would move, the doors would open, and oh, hey, the boss is visiting. Although Jan Bata was the man at the top, he could be up one minute and down the next. And even though he thought of himself as a serious businessman, visitors to this museum considered him to be a gloriously eccentric innovator. Well, if the shoe fits, it's real strange.
I think that the governments of the world know a lot more than they're telling us.
Here, deep in the woods of New Hampshire, lives a woman with a mission. It is said that the truth is out there, and Kathy Martin has made it her job to get to that truth and document it.
Our government and the governments of the world need to very slowly introduce the public to the idea that there may be people on other planets.
As a trained expert in UFO phenomena, Kathy has been exposed to a number of examples of physical evidence. proof of extraterrestrial contact.
If there has been a landing, for example, you will find physical trace evidence that something has occurred. You may find that the vegetation in the area has the characteristics of something that has been microwaved for a few seconds. You might find that the bark on the trees has curled. You might find that the trees have been sheared off, and in conjunction with this you will see the evidence of perhaps a tripod where the craft is set down. You may find a residue underneath that area. In one case that I'm aware of, there was actually an unfortunate porcupine who was underneath the craft, and it looked like a cartoon character that had been completely flattened, and it had been microwaved.
Kathy's first investigation was particularly close to home. It was the experience that motivated her to devote her life to hunting down alien visitors. Kathy's aunt is Betty Hill. In 1963, Betty and her late husband Barney became the first Americans to document contact with alien life, known as a close encounter of the third kind.
My experience began on September 19th, 1961, when Barney and I were in Montreal, Canada, and decided to return home to Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
And there's no doubt in my mind that the Hill case is a good, valid case, and there are several reasons for that. Number one, both Betty and Barney Hill were exceptional people in the community. They were both well-known, well-liked in the community, had absolutely nothing to gain by coming out with a story such as this, and quite a lot to lose.
So we're driving along, and all of a sudden, I saw what I told Barney I thought was a new star in the sky. So we got out of the car with the binoculars. We thought maybe it's a satellite. Well, I looked at it first through the binoculars, and I was puzzled. Then I gave the binoculars to Barney, and he watched it while I returned to the car. And he said, they've seen us, and they've changed direction, and they're coming this way. Barney saw a curved, lighted window with a group of men standing behind the window looking down at him. And about 30 miles south of this area, we're driving along, and all of a sudden, the men that he had seen on board the craft were now standing in the middle of the road, blocking our way.
That was the last thing either Betty or Barney remembered of that night. The next thing they knew, it was dawn, and they were pulling up at their house. Over 3 hours of their journey was unaccounted for. On later examination, Betty found her dress had been discolored by an organic substance. Lab tests showed that this was not of a known terrestrial origin. Despite their obvious distress, neither Betty nor Barney could remember the details of what had happened to them that night. They did know, however, that something was very wrong.
They started to try to find the spot where this occurred. They knew that they had encountered a roadblock, and they knew that there was a period of missing time.
Betty and Barney were unsuccessful in their attempts to piece together the puzzle they had been left with. When Barney became ill as a result of stress, they sought medical advice.
The initial evaluation was done by a medical doctor who said, well, I think, you've got some kind of a physical problem that we need to evaluate, and eventually got to Dr. Benjamin Simon, who did the hypnosis. Dr. Simon wasn't looking for a UFO case. Dr. Simon was trying to see what was the problem, why did we have some anxiety here, and that kind of thing. And he uncovered the UFO case.
When Betty and Barney were regressed to the missing time via hypnosis, the true story of their interrupted journey was revealed.
We were able to recall everything that happened. The men who were blocking the road came up in 2 groups, took us out of the car, along a path in the woods, to where the craft was on the ground. I was taken on board, and Barney was taken into one room, and I was taken into another room. The one who did the testing, we called the examiner. Well, My exam, first they put me on a stool, and they checked my eyes, ears, nose, throat. He put me on a table and said they wanted to check my nervous system. Then they tried to insert a needle-like instrument in my navel, which caused pain, so they stopped doing it. And Barney's exam was very much like mine in the beginning, except they were interested in his bone structure.
The Hill case was, I call it the flagship of the UFO abduction, because there were so many firsts on that case. The needle in the navel being a pregnancy test. We didn't actually do embryonic testing until the late 60s. How did Mrs. Hill know that this was a pregnancy test back before the doctors did? Another interesting factor of the case is Betty drew a star map that, under hypnosis, that was supposedly given to her or shown to her by one of the occupants of the craft.
So I said, I know you're not from this planet, but where are you from? And he showed me a star map.
Subsequent to that, Marjorie Fish tried to put that into a computer database to find out where this star pattern was. Couldn't match it. A couple of years later, new star guide comes out and has 2 stars that we didn't know before in it. Marjorie Fish runs it again, and bingo, perfect match with 2 stars. How did Betty know those 2 stars existed when our astronomers didn't know? That kind of interesting, solid, no-nonsense information that was brought out by the Hill case leads a lot of credibility to the case.
The most startling results from Dr. Simon Sessions came when he persuaded a very distressed Barney to describe his abductors. This sketch was drawn by Barney under hypnosis, which was then used by local artist David Baker to create this image. Now recognized as a classic alien face, but at the time, a face responsible for Barney's nightmares. Betty Hill died October 17, 2004. Finally reunited with her beloved Barney. The Hills' interrupted journey is now over, but for the rest of us, it continues with numerous sightings every year. Their amazing adventure is an essential part of UFO history. Without them, would the creature we now recognize as an alien ever have been drawn, recorded for posterity? It's doubtful. Hanging around, laid back, chilled, mummified, or cured. No one looks great once time and insects have worked on a corpse. But occasionally, death defies nature and offers proof that miracles really can happen. Take the amazing story of Saint Bernadette, for instance. Bernadette Soubirous was born into poverty in Lourdes, France in 1844. In February 1858, at the age of 14, she was out gathering firewood when she had the first of 18 visions. She saw the Virgin Mary standing here in a niche in the rock. She was wearing a white veil, a blue girdle, and had a golden rose on each foot. She asked the young girl to return to the grotto every day for 15 days. Bernadette's story caused a sensation with the townspeople. For each of the 15 days, more and more people followed her, some hoping to get a glimpse of the vision. On one occasion, the crowd gasped. Just beneath the niche where the vision appeared, a rose bush bloomed in the middle of winter. On the 9th visitation, she was told to dig in the ground with her hands, revealing an undiscovered stream. Bernadette drank the stream water, followed by others who believed in the miracle. Since then, 67 cures have been verified by the Lourdes Bureau as inexplicable, although they stopped short of calling them miracles. The 16th vision was even more dramatic. Witnesses say Bernadette was holding a lighted candle which burned down. The flame was then in direct contact with her skin for over 15 minutes, but she showed no signs of pain or injury. Lourdes was changed forever. Millions of sick and dying people still flock to the town every year, hoping to be cured. But while the hordes of visitors proved very lucrative for the townsfolk, it was too much for Bernadette, who sought refuge here at the convent of Saint Gildard at Nevers, about 300 miles away. She said at the time, I've been told of miracles, but I have not seen them. Although in poor health herself, she became an assistant in the infirmary and later created beautiful embroidery for altar cloths and vestments, eventually dying here in this room from tuberculosis when she was 35. But her story was far from over. This was Bernadette before she was buried in 1879, and this is Bernadette today. Her body was exhumed in 1909. How bizarre that the crucifix and rosary she was holding had both oxidized, but her body appeared incorrupt. That is, preserved from decomposition, even though she had never been embalmed. Doctors present at the examination wrote the hands which were crossed on her breast were perfectly preserved, as were the nails. This was considered a miracle, supporting her canonization. The corpse was exhumed twice more, in 1919 and finally in 1925. Her body was still extraordinarily well preserved. Her remains were placed here, in this exquisite gold and crystal coffin, in the Chapel of Bernadette at the Mother House in Nevers, visited by countless pilgrims. She was canonized in 1933, the patron saint of sick persons and of Lord. Was her body preserved by God as a sign of her saintliness? Was it due to some unusual combination of elements in the earth where she was buried? Magic or miracle? We all have our opinions, but one thing is indisputable. The body of Saint Bernadette remains perfect despite being dead for over 130 years. It's strange, real strange. The grave, our final resting place. But for a tortured few, this eternal peace is strangely elusive. Take General Anthony Wayne, for instance. Wayne was a courageous and conscientious soldier in George Washington's army after one particularly deadly attack by the British, during which he lost many of his men. He demanded his own court-martial. He was exonerated. Later, he mounted a daring counterattack on the British, which restored his wounded pride. While Wayne became famous for his courage, his British opponent, Earl Grey, retired and pursued a more peaceful profession, bestowing his good name on a genteel variety of tea, Earl Grey. During his tempestuous career, Wayne earned himself the nickname Mad Anthony. Nothing to do with insanity. It was entirely due to his fiery temper. After a lifetime of gallant military service, he died from a violent attack of gout in December 1796 while stationed at Presque Island Fort in the far north of Pennsylvania. He was buried at the base of this flagpole. His bereaved family, who lived 400 miles away, here in the ancestral home of Waynesboro near Philadelphia, could not attend his funeral. A lock of his hair was cut and sent to them as a treasured memento. 12 years later, his daughter Peggy decided it was time for her father to return home. Isaac, General Wayne's son, rode to Erie in a small two-wheeled carriage called a sulky to collect his father's remains, or at least what remained of his remains, so he could be buried in this family plot at St. David's Church, Radnor. At Presque Island, Isaac met Dr. John Wallace, the physician from Pittsburgh who had been called to the dying Wayne's side. When Wayne's body was exhumed, Wallace and Isaac found the corpse almost perfectly preserved. It was the consistency of chalk, with only one leg decomposed. Unfortunately, Isaac had limited space in his horse-drawn sulky, certainly not enough room for an entire undecayed body. But the good Dr. Wallace had a great idea. He dismembered and boiled the body in this large iron kettle until the flesh dropped off. He cleaned the bones and packed them into Isaac's boxes. The remaining flesh and Wallace's dissecting tools were returned to the coffin and reburied. Isaac then began his long journey across Pennsylvania with his father's bones in a trunk in the back of his sulky. Unfortunately, as the small sulky bumped along the 400 miles of unpaved roads, the box of bones frequently fell, scattering Wayne along the way. Despite trying to gather his father's bits and pieces together, Isaac still left a trail of freshly boiled bones across the state. The general's remains were reburied on July 4th, 1809. The huge crowd who attended the funeral were blissfully unaware that Mad Anthony was definitely a few bones short of a skeleton. But this wasn't the end of his ignoble end. In 1853, the abandoned blockhouse burned down. The coffin lid with the brass tacks, remnants of clothing, and the dissection instruments were rediscovered 25 years later. What little was left of the general was buried, yet again, in a reconstructed Wayne's Blockhouse monument. So, Major General Mad Anthony Wayne, Revolutionary War hero and Commander-in-Chief of the American Army, after 4 funerals, lies buried in 2 places, nearly 400 miles apart. Every New Year's Eve, Mad Anthony's birthday, here along the icy, wooded roads of Pennsylvania, travelers have reported seeing a dismembered body searching through the bushes. Gliding over the snow, the confused cadaver stops occasionally to wrestle with a supernatural dog for what appears to be an arm or a leg bone, still trying to pull himself together. Recently, however, there have been fewer sightings of the general. Perhaps Mad Anthony has decided to remain in his graves, finally able to rest in pieces. Here comes Roger Algram of Algram & Sons, arriving for work at his funeral home in Palatine, Illinois. Or is he? As a matter of fact, he's off for a game of golf on a course, which is a lot more than 6 feet under. While many people like to play a round of golf after work, Roger decided to take the drive out of driving to the club. He built his own course here, under the funeral home. Rain or shine, long day or short, even if he's feeling under par, Roger just has to go down a few stairs to unwind. Mr. Algram's work may be serious, but life certainly isn't all grim for this undertaker.
Well, in 1964, we opened up here in Palatine, and my wife and I moved into the funeral home. We live right here on the premises. So we had this room available, and so I said, well, heck, why not put in a miniature golf course? We only have 9 holes. That's all the room we had. Then as the years went on, we put in a shuffleboard court, and we added some ping pong and table hockey and bumper pool. I was concerned at first as to what the neighbors or our friends or the business community would think about this being in a funeral home, but we did try to keep it separate. Obviously, when there is a visitation going on or a funeral service, there is no playing down here in the miniature golf course.
The greens are full of gory and ghastly icons of death and desiccation, and players can lose their head trying to get the ball past this guillotine. And of course, going up against the tricky haunted mansion hole is never good news. This hole is an open and shut case. Simply drive the ball through the casket without coughing up too many strokes. This mop-top skull welcomes you to the intricately designed cryptorium hole. But with care, there's a penalty for disturbing the graves. While this lighthouse seems like more traditional mini fairway fare, the light it casts illuminates a giant black coffin. But you can still putt in peace, even though the competition may be stiff. The sand trap, which naturally leads to a dead end, is graced by a skull from Roger's mortuary school days. Even Roger's putter is suitably decorated with a corpse, of course. Maybe he should create his own tournament. The Ghost Riders Cup, perhaps. The Algrams have been in the funeral business for over 100 years. Upstairs, they offer a conventional funeral service, but downstairs, the Algrams give convention the birdie as they play on a course to die for. And just to add a little mortification for the mortuary employees, they even get their names inscribed on these gravestones. And while the likes of Tiger Woods may not be clamoring to get in, less ambitious patrons line up to putt. there are Boy Scouts, Rotarians, and even birthday parties where the guest of honor gets his own casket. In fact, Algrim & Sons is that rarest of funeral homes. They enjoy repeat customers. Algrim's puts the fun in funeral. It's all par for the corpse, and it's strange, real strange.